Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of basic engraving to show you the way that we would do that, the best way to set up at your station, and some of the really basic concepts and techniques. Okay, so that's the block that I had inked up a couple of days ago. Prepared, you can see the bits that have come in from the inkjet, those darker lines, and then some of my sketching down here to put tone working. Okay, so that's now good. Nothing's coming off of my finger, so that's good. Okay, this is sandbag, and it's just to raise the block up, and so that when you're engraving, your hand that's not using holding the tool is staying below the block. So if you slip, you don't end up stabbing yourself. Okay, and it just also helps with moving the block around. It gives you more free movement. You could just use anything. You could use a book or a block of wood, something which is maybe a couple of inches high, just to raise it up off the desk is the idea. And also to get your head at the right height as well, so you don't end up with too much neck strain. Okay. So that's the other thing. When you're doing this engraving, it is quite concentrated work, so take regular breaks. You're focusing very close in, so take regular breaks. I've got a window just here. I look out the window occasionally. I get up, I move around, I stretch, so I don't end up with neck and shoulder strain or eye strain. Okay, so I've actually just started engraving this line here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the outline in around the top, because this sky region up here and over here is going to end up blank on this block. I'm going to use a different block to put in some of those details in a much paler tone. So that's I'm going to end up engraving these regions away. So I'm going to put an outline around, and then I know that I can engrave, I can clean up to that outline. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark a cross like that and another cross in that corner. And those crosses tell me regions that I will engrave away later on. And it means that wherever I know, wherever there's a volume, an area with a cross marked in it, I can cut that away without having to think about it. I'm not going to make any silly mistakes and engrave away things that I don't want to engrave away, because I've marked the bits that I do want to engrave away. Okay? The advantage with doing that is that then means that you can leave these areas till the end. So they're your practice blocks. Okay, they're your areas where if you haven't got a tone right, you don't quite know what shade it should be or what texture you should put in there, you've got regions of exactly the same wood as the block's made of that you can be practicing on. So these regions which would be blank are very useful, and I don't end up actually engraving them away until I'm right at the end. Okay, so I'm going to do some engraving. In order to do engraving, this is the visualizer. See, if I move it, it's the thing that's doing taking that image. I wouldn't normally have that there. So normally I have a light, and that's a good cold LED light, and it's behind me and to my left because I'm right-handed, so as I'm engraving here, the shade of that light isn't going into the region I'm cutting. Okay, if I was left-handed, then I'd have my light to the right and behind me, so it's illuminating that way. Okay, so let's start engraving. I'm long-sighted, so I use a little magnifier. That magnifier clips onto my glasses, and it's about I don't know, 2 or 3 times magnification. It's not that great magnification, not that large magnification, it just makes everything a little bit clearer. The first thing I'm going to use is this tool here. That's a lozenge graver. You can see it's got that lozenge shape, that little diamond shape. And it's very good for cutting out lines. You can get nice curves on it, and it's relatively easy to control. This is actually an antique that I bought in a second-hand shop I don't know how old it is, but you can see it's in a terrible state. But I like it, I get on with it. So it's what I use for a lot of my outline work. So, let's get engraving. So you can see that a lot of the bending, the curvature comes from turning the block rather than turning my hand. So my hand, with the tooling, is just pushing forwards, and it's the block that's providing the curvature. It's the turning the block that's providing the curvature. Okay. And this scene, the hill in the background, is in the mist. It's quite some way away, so I'm going to have a fade. So I don't want actually very sharp outlines, rugged outlines. I want relatively curved and smooth outlines because I want to get that feeling of slight indistinctness and mist. This is part of a series of engravings that I've been doing, which are related to the weather in Scotland. So this engraving is going to end up with several different blocks interacting with them. The one that I'm cutting at the moment will be what's called the key block, and so that will have the black line in it, all of the main high contrast parts of it, and all of the outlining aspects. Actually, even for this key block, I'm not going to print it in a single go. I'm going to do is use it as a reduction block, and I'm going to print some parts of it, and then I'm going to engrave them away and overprint it with a slightly darker colour to give a reduction. And that way, the nice thing about reduction printing is that every time I reprint it, it's already exactly the right shape, so I can get perfect registration. If I were to engrave, I could do the same thing by engraving multiple blocks with the same image. They'd have to be exactly right for them to register exactly. So reduction is a good way of getting very good registration, but it's risky as well, because if you make a mistake in one of your colours, you can't go back and undo it, because you don't have the blocks anymore, you've removed material from the blocks. So that's the outline there. I've not bothered to go right the way through, because actually, for the very distant things, all I'm going to have is these lines. So these are going to be just lines, and then I'm going to use a second block, which will just be a tone block to give the filling in of that tone. So I'm not going to turn these into lines. I'm going to put in some of the other ones closer in first. Put in those crosses. That's going to go, and this area is going to go as well. There we are. It's always quite nice to, at an early stage, put a couple of bold marks in on the block. Don't be nervous about engraving the block. Okay, put a couple of bold marks in somewhere where you're not going to use it. A couple of gratuitous tool marks. There we are. The block's no longer perfect. I can do what I want with it now. Maybe it's just me, but I think people can get a little bit nervous about starting engraving, about putting the first marks on the block. So now we're going to turn this one into line and following along the inside of this line. And make it quite a bit thin. I'm just using the graver just thicken, dig slightly deeper with it, and just thicken the line that I've, the white line that I'm doing. If I'm doing that, I'm making the black line that's left over slightly thinner. Okay, so you can see that in order to produce a black line there, I've had to outline either side of it in white. And it's a wood engraving. Ultimately what's going to be printed is the surface that's left behind. So it's a black line, so it's a white line process. Whenever you cut a line like that, that will print as white. Okay? So in order to leave a black line there, you have to make two parallel white lines that outline the black line that I want to engrave. Okay? So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do that for all of these, all of the outline and these ones in here as well. Okay, so I'll probably end up going about this far like that around here, and then where the tone is starting to come in, I'm going to start putting a lot more tonal work and line work. Actually fill some of the volume in here with this key block. But for the background of the key block, I'm just going to be putting in these little outlines.